Welcome to the Growth Boss Podcast, where we seek out the secrets to high-performing campaigns from some of the smartest marketers in the world. I'm your host, Jarod Smith. Today, I have Jarod Spiewak with me, and he's going to teach us what it takes to 3x your ROI from Google Ads by firing your marketing and sales department. Jarod, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, Jarod, for people who may not know you, can you give us a quick 60-second overview of your background?
Yeah, of course. So, as you mentioned, my name's Jarod Spiewak. I'm the founder of Comet Fuel. We're a revenue marketing agency that specializes in Google Ads, and we're the creators of Clicks to Cash. My background is I started college pretty early at 15. I got into the world of SEO by writing SEO content online to make some money to help pay for that college. I went to school for marketing that led to me working a little bit over a year in real estate marketing. And then from there, you might be surprised to know this, but then I transitioned to working for a law firm marketing agency for just under 2 years. And from that experience, I branched out and started my own SEO agency called Blue Dog Media in 2018. And then that rebranded to Comet Fuel in 2020 with a focus on Google Ads.
Awesome. That was a great rundown. So I do want to touch on one part there, the law firm marketing agency. So that was my agency that I had, Blackfin, a number of years, feels like a couple lifetimes ago. And I'll never forget going into that interview where we interviewed you. And I told my team, I was like, this guy has to be absolutely brilliant for us to hire a second Jarod in the company. And so, if he's not brilliant, we're not taking him. They're like, hey, we really liked him. I'm like, okay, so I'll interview him. And of course, we did end up hiring you. And it was a phenomenal, I think, experience for everyone involved. But the interesting thing for me, there's a lot of people that have switched from SEO to PPC. I know a lot of people that have done that. I don't know anybody as successful as you, though, because I feel like a lot of people switch from SEO to PPC because they really didn't understand how to do SEO well. But you were one of the best SEOs that I knew, and you still switched. So I'm curious, give us a little bit of history on why you switched from SEO to PPC.
Yeah, so I think from my purview, the reason why, because a lot of people switch from SEO to PPC is exactly what you said. And I think that they were struggling to get results because I was still working on SEO when I saw this transition starting to happen within all the Facebook groups, etc. Is SEO got to a point where it was no longer just rent some PBNs and the site will rank. And once you had to start being, I guess, more thoughtful and skillful at SEO, a lot of people who just took all the courses, copy and pasted those strategies were really struggling and had to find something else. And, the courses went the direction of ads. So that's where people went as well.
Yep.
For myself, what happened was, SEO was the goal. Ads, I'm sure you could find me talking on podcasts back then about ads don't work, ads are a waste of money, et cetera, et cetera. But what happened was we had this client and they said, the only way you're going to work with us is if you also work on our ad account. And I had worked on a couple Google ad accounts in the past, but nothing really seriously. And I was like, you know what? Sure, like you're a pretty decent SEO contract. They were going to be the biggest client at the time. So it would be really silly for me to say no. And so I started managing their ad account and it was going okay, but not great. And then I ended up hiring a Google Ads agency to try and replace me and get better results for the client. And that just did not go well whatsoever. And I was like, okay, like I should not be able to get better results than a professional with like 2 YouTube videos worth of experience.
Right.
So over time, we get more and more clients would ask occasionally, like, hey, can you work on an ad account, Said no for a long time. And eventually I just started saying yes. And what I found was through ads, because it's so much easier to track, there's less of a black box compared to, Google's SEO algorithms. We were able to measure the results that we were getting more easily, report those results to clients more easily. And it was easier for them to grow their business through ads is what I found compared to some of the nuances of like, hey, you wake up and your website is placement number 5 instead of, this top spot and there's no explanation. And, those are just really, as difficult conversations, frustrating conversations to have. And so for a period of time, I was doing both. I said, you know what, we're going to do Google Ads and SEO. And we just weren't a large enough company to sustain doing both while me being the person trying to drive both of those products. So I just made the executive decision to drop the SEO side of things, focus on Google Ads. And that happened over the course of like 2019 in the second half. And then we've rebranded to Comet Fuel with the launch of the public announcement of, hey, we're now an ad agency.
Awesome. That was a great overview as well. All right. So everybody is dying to understand, first of all, how do we 3X our ROI from Google Ads, and why do we have to get rid of our sales and marketing department? I can tell you, for me, I've got a phenomenal salesperson. I don't want to get rid of her. What are we supposed to do?
What you're supposed to do, or at least what I think you're supposed to do, is stop siloing these departments. I'm sure you run into this all the time. I run into it all the time. If something goes wrong with marketing, marketing blames sales. If something goes wrong with sales, sales blames marketing. And there's this constant infighting between these two departments, which have a shared common goal, which is to help the business make more money. There are nuances about the business that sales understands that marketing doesn't, and that marketing understands that sales doesn't. And so I find that this disconnect of information often sometimes prevents campaigns from being successful at all. Sometimes there's a smoking gun. Sometimes it's death of 1,000 cuts. But I'm a real believer that at the very least, sales and marketing should be one unified department, with different roles, sales roles, marketing roles, et cetera. And ideally, further throughout the revenue cycle should also be considered as an attachment to that department, where what your operations team, what your customer support team is doing does affect marketing and sales. It affects sales and marketing's understanding of who the customer is, who the ideal customer is, what are the real pain points that they're facing. And unfortunately, when that knowledge doesn't get passed back up the chain or down the chain, it just creates these knowledge gaps that could be severely impacting the overall potential success of whatever marketing campaign that you're running.
That makes a lot of sense. Looking at my e-commerce company, if I were to set that up again, sales and marketing would be under one department. We would call it either revenue generation or growth marketing. Everything has to come through there. And it's interesting to me, kind of in that same vein, when you were introducing yourself earlier, you said, I think you said a revenue generation company. What's the
revenue marketing?
Revenue marketing.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's interesting for me is when I decided to kind of relaunch an agency, I was like, it's not going to be SEO. It's not going to be PPC. It's growth. It's growth marketing. It's a holistic view of it. And I think that's kind of what you're saying now too.
Exactly. Yeah. So what I like to tell people is there are only three things that we care about: is how much money are you making, how much money are you spending, and are you happy with the ratio between the two?
Yeah.
That is it. Everything else is just a way to diagnose why one of those three things is going wrong. Like, I could care less what your click-through rate is, what your conversion rate is. All of that is a way to diagnose something that's way more important.
Perfect. So how do we go about 3Xing the ROI? Where does that start?
So the first thing that you have to do is have a way to actually measure your ROI. I have a lot of conversations with people that say that I go, what is your goal? Make more money. How much money? I don't know. How will you know when you're making more money? I don't know. Great start. And that's just a recipe for disaster where you're basically guaranteed to lose, because nobody knows if you're heading in the right direction, if you've hit your goal, if you've gone past it, if you're missing it, etc. So what's important is to just write down piece of paper, spreadsheet, whatever works, every step somebody goes through from the first initial click to cash being in the bank. So let's just take a relatively simple sales cycle. Somebody has to click an ad. Great. That'll be tracked by Google. No problem. You don't have to worry there. Somebody then becomes a lead. They fill out your contact form. They call you. Great. Google has built-in call tracking, you have form tracking, all basic stuff. You can find a million articles online about how to do that. Okay, great. This is where a lot of people get stuck. Now I have my CRM, or my database of leads, and I don't know who came from where. So the benefit of a lot of advertising channels, Google Ads is also one of them, is you can pass additional data with your clicks to make it clear where that person came from. You can do this with UTM parameters. You can do this with the CLID, or the Google Click ID. And what that does, it allows you to basically attach additional tracking information to that person. So I can then see what channel did they come from, what campaign, what ad, what keyword, etc. And within my CRM, I then already know, if I'm using it properly, what deal stage they're making it to, how long it takes them to get there, who the salesperson is, attributed to that, how much money I made from them, etc. And now I have the ability to see how profitable, or how far down the deal stage, cost, rates, etc., do people from a specific keyword, ad group, campaign, ad network, depending on how you're looking at the data, location, etc., makes it. And then I can use that information to find where the biggest holes and gaps in what I'm doing are. Where are people falling off? And I can use all that data to visualize it in different ways to find various opportunities for improvement.
Oh man, that's really good. How frequently do you find these gaps that end up making a substantial difference in the business, where you're like, hey, did you know a bunch of things people are falling off in this particular, area?
I would say if we work with somebody long enough, it's nearly 100%, simply
Yeah.
because as businesses grow, things get dropped, knowledge gets lost. People come in, they build something, they set up a Zapier automation, people forget and they don't realize, whoops, if you send a Google parameter through with Google as a
Yeah.
lowercase g, turns out it just ignores it, it throws it in the trash. Nobody knew that because
Interesting.
that person left the company 2 years ago. Long enough period of time, there'll almost always be something, but not with every necessary engagement. If we're working with someone for only a couple months, we're just
Yeah.
coming in and fixing something, we might not become familiar enough to notice if there is a smoking gun. But inevitably, just with how complicated it is to grow a business and how rapidly things change, people come in and out, almost all 100% of the time, we will find something that somebody overlooked that was
Yep.
a relatively easy fix.
Okay, so you get the basics in place. We've got tracking set up properly. Everything's set up properly. Where do you go from there?
The one thing that I would always double check is do you have an actual achievable goal? With small advertisers, large advertisers, this is the bane of my existence
Mm,
is talking to someone. What do you want to do? I want results. Cool. Like me too.
yeah.
But what are those results? And so really quick, the SMART goal framework is a good framework to use for creating goals. I'm sure there's plenty of those other ones out there. You can agree, disagree, etc. But having something where everybody knows what we're working towards and we all have a way to know if we're heading in the right direction or not.
Hmm.
That is step one. If you don't have that, you're basically guaranteed to fail because someone will always be able to say, hey, it's not going as well as I feel like it should be going. And because of that, this is a failure. So we want to
Yep.
remove those feelings from the equation. So we're now in a place, we have something live. We know what goal we're trying to achieve. We know how we can measure it. We know for sure that it is reasonably obtainable to achieve. From here, we're going to be missing something, like one of those three things that I mentioned earlier. Either we're going to be trying to spend more money than we're actually spending, right? We're trying to operate at a higher scale and we're just failing to find a way to do so. We're failing to get the specific ROAS or ROI that we're trying to hit, or we're spending enough money, we're making that ratio between the two, but something else is just going wrong. Whether that's customer volume, doesn't matter that we're making a lot of money, we just have a bunch of people sitting around doing nothing all day because we need the smaller deals coming in as well, et cetera, et cetera. We've identified that something is going wrong. What we want to do then is pull as many data points as possible. Over time, you're going to automate this because you'll know what you want to look at. Close rate per person, lead qualification based off the size of the business if you're B2B, et cetera, et cetera. And we're looking for those nuances to go, where are we seeing performance to be really good that we can double down on, or where are we seeing performance that is weak that we can go away from? A number of examples. Some of these are smoking guns, some of these are less so. So in one instance, we were working with a company and we were running a profitable campaign for them, but it wasn't anything really to write home about. It was like, hey, great, we're happy to increase spend, but like, nobody's celebrating really. And what happened was we found that 85% of the leads that came in due to a broken Zapier integration were not assigned to a salesperson. And this is a company that generates thousands of leads a month.
Wow.
85%, no salesperson was ever getting in touch with them. And so that is a scenario where you could have a great marketing campaign.
Yeah.
You could have a great sales team. You could have perfect pricing and offer matching with who wants to buy from you. You're only talking to 15% of the leads that were
Crazy.
generated. So that's a scenario where like nobody planned for that to ever be broken. It's just who was responsible for that changed hands over time. And eventually someone goes to go from point A to point B and is like, wait, where is my test submission in this form that I was trying to fix just to make sure that everything went through correctly? Where did that go? Or, oh, why is Bob saying that no leads were assigned to him today? We saw a bunch of leads. Shouldn't that be? And like someone just accidentally stumbles upon that and goes, wow, that's a problem. We need to fix
Wow.
that.
Yeah.
So those are scenarios where, long term, everybody gets to laugh about it. Short term, everybody's, angry that happened because
Exactly.
everybody, yeah. So there can be smoking guns like that. There are also more important instances, such as following beyond just the lead. So what I mean by that is a lot of lead gen companies within Google Ads, by default, assuming that you set up conversion tracking, what you'll see is how many people filled out a form or called me for most companies, live chat, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
The challenge is that somebody filling out or a form being submitted or a phone call being initiated does not mean it was a real person, does not mean it was a qualified person, does not mean that that is a conversation that you actually wanted to have. So it's important then to not just look at how many leads did we get, but how many qualified leads did we get? And if you generate enough leads. You can separate that MQLs, SQLs. How many sales did we get from that, and how profitable were those sales?
Hmm.
And if we look at all that together, you can easily find yourself in a scenario where keyword A generated 10 leads, 3 of them were good. For the same exact cost, keyword B generated 5 leads, 4 of them were good. But if you're only paying attention to leads, you're going to double and triple down on the former, still generating good leads.
Sure.
But over time, you're going to run into this issue where it's like, man, why are our leads so expensive? Or why
Yeah.
is our CAC so high? And the team who's running that ad account is like, what do you mean? Like, our conversions have been exponentially increasing. We're doing such a good job. It must be sales. It must
Yeah.
be, it must be those people over at sales. They just can't sell for their lives. And sales is like, these leads suck. Like,
Right.
what? Like
Exactly.
these, and you just get that infighting. And so by being able to map that out, by having everybody being able to see that information, you can look and go, oh wow, actually, keyword B, even though everything inside of Google is going to go red as soon as we start spending more money on keyword B,
Yep.
we know for a fact that that's actually more profitable. And I can tell you for a fact that 90 to 95% of businesses never track beyond just that form completion, that
Yeah.
phone call. And so there's a hidden gem of information that says, hey, what is actually most profitable? What is actually driving those qualified leads? And depending on the scenario that your business is in, let's say you're in a scenario that you're really overwhelmed, you're a professional service-based business, it's really hard to hire new people, and so you're at a point where you're just overwhelmed and you want to only focus on the biggest jobs, the biggest cases, the biggest clients that you can, because that's where you make the most money and you can only handle so many. Well, how do you do that if all you're tracking is form fills and phone calls?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could have some like qualifying questions on the form, et cetera, but being able to double down and say, hey, actually this keyword only generates it costs us 5 times more per lead, but we make so much more money. That's actually the direction of what business wants to go. I don't care that Google Ads says I'm doing everything wrong, that my clicks are down, my impressions are down, my click-through rate's down, my
Yeah.
cost per conversion is up. I know that I'm making the right decision.
Amazing. So how do you, I mean, first of all, how many businesses, well, I guess you answered that 90, less than 95% are actually getting that dialed in. I've never had a business that I've ever worked with that had that dialed in. So I guess my next question is, how do you do that? So you guys have the data coming from Google Ads. What are you tying that into, like Salesforce on their side?
This is where it becomes a little bit tricky and where I think that we have a lot of security in what we do,
Sure.
because a lot of people, a lot of marketers are lazy,
Yep.
and we get to take advantage of that because it is custom every single time. It
Yep.
depends what software do you use, what does your software allow you to do. Sometimes you're using a form system that'll automatically track all that tracking data for you. Other times you're using Tag Manager to create custom web cookies, and you're basically working with developers to create a bunch of custom code and integrations to be able to capture that information. Sometimes you're just using a single Zapier integration to connect that form to your CRM with all that tracking data. Other times you're using a CRM system that doesn't allow for custom fields and you have to find a workaround. Other times you're working with a system that has no Zapier integration and now you're creating custom webhooks.
Oh my goodness.
So for us, we've just learned over time that the things that you just have to deal with and the ways that you go about it. But at the core of it is Google will send you tracking data. What's most important is that GCL ID because that allows you to import data back into Google.
Okay.
You still want to keep it separate though because you're limited in what you can import back, and you want to maintain the Google stuff so you can see it with Google, and then the CRM, which should always be the source of truth. The GCL ID is really what you need. You pass that through. You can capture it as a hidden form field, or if you're using a service like CallRail, it'll capture it for you automatically. And then through an integration, custom or simple like Zapier, send that information into your CRM, ideally as a separate field, so you get all the additional ways to quickly go through things if you're on Excel, etc.
Yeah.
And from there, if you have the UTMs, you can also just see, campaign, ad group, et cetera, within your CRM, or you export that information, the GCL ID, when they became a lead, what conversion action it is, and you just send that back into Google. It'll upload in about 24 hours, the data will populate. And then when you go into your conversion actions, you'll be able to see, qualified leads or whatever you call it.
That is brilliant. So if there's a business owner that is just getting started, or they're like, hey, we're actually looking for a new CRM. I want to get something that syncs up well with Google Ads. Is there one that syncs up well, or do they all kind of require a little bit of custom, programming or something?
If you can afford it, HubSpot is great. So I've heard I have no direct affiliation with any of these companies, but what I have personally heard from people is that Salesforce is very difficult to work through.
Yep.
HubSpot, what is nice is they literally have like 2 clicks in your setup, and HubSpot also will create the tracking template for the URLs and they'll maintain it as well. Meaning if somebody
Yep.
goes into your account and edits it, they'll just overwrite the edit. So it kind of protects you in that sense, but that'll automatically pass a lot of information back in the HubSpot. If you're using HubSpot forms, it'll capture a lot of the stuff for you. That'll make it really easy. The downside, HubSpot's very expensive.
Yeah.
So
but like you said, the difference between understanding what these numbers are that are driving the best results and not understanding it can be, I would say in my business, is at least a 3x return.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if you're starting off day one,
Sure.
probably don't worry about HubSpot. But yes, if you have the money, if it's in the budget, I do think it can very easily pay itself back, because this isn't just applicable to Google Ads. This is applicable to every marketing channel you have. I
Right.
would highly recommend in any of your marketing reporting that you're doing, having a understanding what percentage of your leads are unattributed and getting that as close as possible to 0%. So you can actually understand where are people coming from, what
Yep.
channels, at least from a last click attribution source. If you want to get really fancy, you can track first and last click attribution. Just the first time they interacted, save that, and then second record, the last time they interacted, what was that field as well?
Sure.
More complicated, but you can do that. Aside from that, make sure it has an API that works with like Zapier or Make, which used to be Integromat. That'll make things really easy in terms of setting up integrations, and make sure that you can add hidden fields, or not hidden fields, custom fields to your CRM. There are like some for like freelancers that'll be like $10 a month. That'll be great for just like basically a spreadsheet with fewer features, funnily enough. If it has an API, chances are you're good to go.
We get the tracking dialed in. It's syncing up with the CRM. Interestingly enough, you haven't said ad copy or landing page, I think even once so far. Are those important elements or not as much?
Here's my view on all that. Your ad copy doesn't matter unless your ads aren't performing well enough. Then you need to increase your ad copy. But if you have ad copy that's super generic and you're like, hey, I'm meeting my goal, great, it's done its job. Like, could we, of course, iterate upon that? Absolutely. Should you be running ad copy tests? Absolutely. But is ad copy going to be the difference, especially on Google Ads, where you're so limited? Search ads, you have 30
Sure.
characters per headline. Is that going to be the difference between you running a campaign that you spend $1 and you make $2 back versus spending $1 and making $10 back? Almost never. And so it's more of a refinement than it is like a slashing cut, like a massive change. You're going to get a fairly small result from that small change. Is ad copy important? Yes, but how hard is it to make sure that if you're trying to sell red widgets, that your ad copy says you can buy red widgets here in some way, shape, or form? If you've done that, you're at least on the right track.
Okay.
Sure.
Interesting.
Could you yeah. So, yeah, I like to just focus on what is the actual big problem. Is if your landing page is generating, if you're converting at an acceptable rate, depending on industry, et cetera, depends on what an acceptable rate is, then yes, I'm always going to be iterating on it. But how much effort am I going to spend on the landing page? I don't know, unless I know what the biggest problem that campaign is. If my campaign's biggest problem is I'm not getting enough qualified leads, I'm definitely not going to be running tests where I'm changing the color of a button. That's not going to change the lead qualification. So that's what I really recommend to people, is like all those tests, whatever, it doesn't matter. You have to identify what is the problem that I need to solve right now. What is the biggest problem? And then focus on what are the optimizations that I can make that will affect that. Really quick anecdote, like CTR. I hear from all people, oh, what if our CTR is higher? You're spending your full ad budget. Okay, what if your CTR was 100%? What if it was 1%? If you're maximizing the amount of clicks that you can get based off your cost per click divided by your budget, or budget divided by cost per click, CTR doesn't matter.
Yeah, interesting.
Nuancely, cost per click can go down. Yes, nuance, et cetera, et cetera. But at least at a high level, if you're spending your full budget, cost per click-through rate isn't going to make that big of an impact directly.
So what is the next thing that you look at?
So from there, really, the entire process is iterative. We're trying to go from point A to point B, and we're not doing that as well as we want to. We're not doing it as quickly as we want to. From here, it's a matter of iterating upon every single step of that revenue cycle to see what's going to move us in that right direction. And what I don't mean by this is I don't just mean test your ad copy and test things on your landing page. What I mean is we've worked with companies that have said, okay, we're going to 10x our pricing. Let's see what happens. And we worked with a company that 10x their pricing. They went from about a 2.2 ROAS to an 11x ROAS
Wow.
in, I want to say, like 3 weeks. They adjusted their offer a little bit to make it more enticing on the higher
Sure.
prices. It wasn't just, add an extra zero on the pricing page.
Yeah.
But would we have ever gotten an 11x ROAS if they had not increased their pricing? Probably not, or at least probably not within that same time frame, definitely not within 3 weeks. And
Right.
so the path of least resistance, which is something that I talk about a lot, was that pricing increase. Like, yes, could we potentially solve a problem over the course of 6 months while you're spending thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to get you from point A to point B? Could there also be something from that first click to cash being in the bank that'll take you 20 minutes to fix, that'll do the
Right.
same result for a lot
Right.
less money? And so these are the conversations that I like having with people. Like, we're working with a company, and the leads were going to their sales team, their inbound sales team. And that makes sense. Like, hey, people are searching for what they're doing. They're calling, they're filling out a form, and then the inbound sales team is working those leads. Nobody was selling. And so they switched the sales team to be the outbound sales team. And all of a sudden, sales started coming in because, for whatever reason, for this particular niche, people were just who were searching on Google were just like more hesitant to actually take that
Sure. A
step
little more
forward.
casual.
And so the outbound sales team, who is a lot more familiar with chasing people and being like, hey, this is why you should consider it, and not just be like, great, like, sign up. All of a sudden, we went from, I want to say, like a $2,000 CAC to like an $800 CAC, which was in the acceptable range for this particular client, pretty much overnight, just by, we weren't even involved in that. It was just the client recognizing, just listening to sales calls and going, huh, what if we just tried switching this? What
Yeah.
would happen? And it worked.
Amazing.
Path of least resistance.
Yeah, exactly. That is fascinating. One of the nuances that you're sharing right now is, a lot of this comes down to the relationship that you have with the business owner, how much they know about their business. And I have always found that to be the case. Is the business owners where I can work closely with them, they know their stuff, we have the best, results. What are the things that you feel like differentiate great business owners from the not as successful ones? And this is, again, from an agency standpoint, working with agencies.
I think a big thing is participation in their own business and collaboration with the parties that are associated with that business. So what I mean by participation, I guess I can kind of speak to both at the same time, I think, is we'll work on engagements, as I'm sure you have as well, where the expectation, maybe not understood up front, but you come to understand that their expectation is hire agency, boxes checked, they're going to do their thing, I'm going to make a bunch of money, and that's it.
Absolutely.
And come to find out, whether that's when the engagement is ending or whether you just kind of stumble upon it, is there were problems that could have been solved if that was just communicated, if we were just actually trying to work together, if marketing wasn't viewed as this necessary evil.
Mm.
We were working with a company, we'd been running their ads for a while, and then they just kind of canceled out of the blue, which is surprising because internally we have this very unfancy system of like green, yellow, red for clients, which is basically how likely do we feel they're going to cancel.
Mm.
And anytime a green client cancels, that's when I go like, what went wrong? Like,
Right.
this should not have happened. And I was like really surprised. Like, we've had great conversations. They've been talking to us about scaling. And all of a sudden they're just gone. Like, what happened? And through our kind of our off-putting process, they were like, man, yeah, we just learned we're advertising nationally. And they were just like, we've really learned that people who were in like just our specific state that the home office is in, and who are looking for this particular service of all the things that we were advertising are what's really closing and making the money. So we're going to go promote that elsewhere. And I'm like, that would have been like 10 seconds of work for us to like reduce the geographic targeting to that, and to only focus on that particular service. And, because as much as we want full like root access, ideally, to the CRMs to pull all this information
Yeah.
for ourselves, we don't always get that, unfortunately. Buy-in is one of the struggles that we definitely face. And it's just one of those moments where you're like, man, like, they're probably, not singing our praises if people ask how good
Yeah.
we are as a company. And you're just like, we could have solved that. We could have fixed this. All we had to do was be on the same side. We
Yep.
just had to be working through the same goal correctly. We just had to have a conversation about each other's perspectives on what was happening. And, I have a million stories of talking about the same exact thing where it's like, man, if only this was communicated to us, we could have potentially turned this around for
Yeah.
you. But yeah,
Absolutely.
if you're not collaborating with everybody who's involved in that
Yep.
process, if you're not participating in it, it's if you're successful, I would say there's more luck than
Yep.
strategy at that point.
That's so well said. And the reality of the situation is nobody knows your business better than you do as the business owner. And so that's where, if I'm jumping into certain conversations, if I'm promoting my business, or if I'm on the agency side working with a business owner, I need to know those nuances. I need to know what makes them special and unique and different, and how this whole process works, so that we can get them the best results. And that makes a lot of sense. If they're not super involved or collaborating, how am I supposed to know? How am I supposed to, really get exceptional results for that client?
Yeah, absolutely. Funnily enough, I was talking to a PI firm yesterday, and they were telling me, I can't share the well, as long as I don't say the name, I should be able to share some things. But basically, um, I was being told about the process of building a case. And the owner of the firm was telling me, he's like, within the first couple of years of me owning my firm, I had multiple seven-figure cases. And and he was telling me that he's talked to PI lawyers who have worked for decades without getting a single seven-figure case. And he was telling me about like the nuance of just being able to build a case and knowing how to build a case can be the difference of this case being worth 100 grand or $1 million.
Yeah.
And understanding like what types of, for PI specifically, like if you're the firm that is building cases only to the point where they're worth, 30, 40, $50,000 versus the firm who's building cases to, 7, 8 figures, that's going to be two very different results you
Oh my
need on the
goodness.
marketing side
Yeah.
in order for that to work with you.
Yep.
And not only that, also, here's the more nuance, especially appreciated on the PI side, you're not getting that money right away either. So if
Right.
I don't understand that, imagine I've never worked with a PI firm and I didn't understand that just because you accepted a seven-figure case doesn't mean you're getting a penny of that money,
Right.
especially if it goes to trial for potentially years. And so
Yeah.
now you're fronting hundreds of thousands of dollars while I'm over here being like, yes, this was super successful. I just made you $3 million on
Yep.
paper.
Yep.
But if that's not communicated, like, hey, yes, but by the way, we are fronting hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next 2 years before this goes to trial,
Yep.
understanding that and going, oh, I need to rethink how this looks versus working with that other firm who's maybe working a lot of smaller cases that are settling in, 3, 4 months, never making it past pre-litigation because the insurance company's like, yeah, like I'll just pay out. Don't have to worry about it. Like we're not
Yep.
going to court over this. And so that's going to be a very different firm where they're getting their payouts in, 2, 3, 4 months versus that firm that's getting those bigger cases over the course of years.
Yep. Huge, huge difference. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. And one of the questions I really like to ask at the end is, what do you feel the top 1% of your campaigns have in common? Now, obviously, you brought up a lot about collaborating with the business owner, with the company. So assuming that somebody's doing that, what are some of the other nuances that those top 1% campaigns have?
I think a lot of the really special stuff, we covered, but something that we didn't talk too much about that is really interesting and can be more than just, a single campaign or two is what is the actual offer that's being presented to the user? And that is going to make a world of difference to the marketing campaign because marketing is there to polish and refine what your offer is and to make it really enticing to somebody. So to give you an idea, we're working with an accounting firm and their offer is, hey, if we don't make you as much money, if we don't save you as much money on your taxes as we're going to charge you in our first year of working together, your second year of working with us is free.
Nice.
Now, imagine that being what is communicated to somebody at the top of a landing page versus, hey, we're a CPA firm. I promise we're really good. Please book a consultation with us.
Yeah,
Who is
exactly.
going to get that call booked?
Yep.
And the offer makes a world of difference. And so if you can find an offer, there's, Godfather offers is a very common term that you can Google that and find a million resources. If you can find like a really good offer, that's going to do like 80% of the legwork for
Yeah.
you because from there, the marketing is just communicating that offer in a way that people understand and is really polishing it. But if it's just, hey, we look like every other company, you click on 4 ads, everybody's landing page looks the same, the copy all reads relatively the same, the offer is exactly the same.
Yep.
Who am I going to go with? I'm going to choose some BS reason. Oh, these guys have
Yep.
a 4.6 stars on Google. Those other guys have 4.4. I'm going to contact the 4.6.
Exactly.
Everybody knows it makes no difference whatsoever,
Yep.
but that's all you're giving me to make a decision by.
Brilliant. Yeah. One of my favorite books is $100 million Offers, where Alex
Yep.
Hormozy talks about, you want to make an offer so good people feel stupid saying no. And that's kind of what I hear you saying there. It's essential. And it's interesting. Yesterday, I was just writing, working on kind of a guide that I'm going to be giving away. And, people think about these differentiators and these offers as like, hey, I'm just going to sit down for 15 minutes or an hour and knock this out. And I'm like, I've been spending months working on one for myself. And I just have it now to the point where I'm like, this is really good. And that's after talking to dozens of prospects and clients and closing them with different offers. But it's not a one hit like, hey, let's just knock this out and then we're done. It's a constant, ever evolving process. So appreciate you bringing that up. Jarod, this has been amazing. How can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to cometfuel.com or feel free to email me directly at Jarod, Jarod, at cometfuel.com.
You're brilliant. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate having you on today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.